Good day, and welcome to the What to Expect Next in the Electricity and Natural Gas Markets and on Capitol Hill conference call. Today's program is being recorded. Our speakers will address web questions at the conclusion of today's presentation. However, you are encouraged to submit questions throughout the conference. If you would like to ask a web question, you can do so by clicking in the Ask a Question box. Simply type in your question and then select on the Submit button. I would now like to turn the call over to Mr. David Kaufman. Please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is David Kaufman, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing at GDF Suez Energy Resources. At this time, I'd like to welcome everyone to the GDF Suez Energy Resources webinar entitled What to Expect Next in Electricity and Natural Gas Markets and on Capitol Hill, with speaker Andy Weissman. Andy Weissman is the Editor-in-Chief and Publisher of Energy Business Watch, as well as Senior Energy Advisor at Haynes & Boone. We have a diverse audience in this webinar session. Participants include energy buyers from small businesses all the way up to Fortune 100 companies. Additionally, we have many third-party consultants and brokers online with us today. You may download the slides at any time by clicking the Download Presentation button at the bottom of the screen. Also, a link to the recorded presentation will be sent to you via email after the webinar. If you're having any technical difficulties with today's presentation, please select the Help button at the bottom of the screen for an event help guide. In a minute, we'll begin today's presentation, What to Expect Next in the Electricity and Natural Gas Markets and on Capitol Hill, with speaker Andy Weissman. At this time, I'd like to turn over today's program to Andy Weissman. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, David. I'm certainly really pleased to have an opportunity to discuss these very important issues with all of you, and I'm pleased, frankly, with the level of interest in these webinars. I believe we have more than 500 people registered for this webinar, and I'll do my best to try to make it as informative as possible. If we can go to slide 2. I skipped over my biography because you can read that later at your leisure. This, we think, is really a very important time for all of you, for all of us who are interested in the energy markets, and particularly for all of you responsible for energy purchasing. And we're going to talk about two basic topics today. We're going to discuss the market, where it is now, where we think it's likely to head, and we're also going to discuss events that are occurring in Washington. And those two topics are really dovetailing, and they're leading, we think, to a very specific conclusion, which is that the energy markets could be changing significantly. That we think that the next 30 to 60 days could be a very important time to think about covering some significant portion of your open requirements, and we think that basically that it may be important to look a little further out in time in terms of your purchasing decisions than may be typical for a lot of the people listening into this call. We think that this set of circumstances are arising at this point that may make it important and timely to think about covering positions going out 3 years, or in some instances longer. And essentially, there are really fundamentally two reasons for this conclusion that this may be a very important time to act. And one is that for a very specific set of reasons, we think that the forward strips could reach a low point for the year sometime within the next 30 to 60 days. And secondly, that we see, particularly when we look at what's going on in Washington now, the potential for some really fairly major shifts in the energy markets that increase the upside risk looking further out in time. And those shifts involve changes that could start occurring in 2015 and 2016, but we think they could start being priced into the forward curves in a fairly significant way, even sometime later this year. And so if those two conclusions are right, if the forward strips are likely to have a significant possibility of bottoming out as soon as 30 to 60 days from now, and if by later this year we could see the entire forward curve for both electricity and natural gas potentially start to move upward, then that combination of circumstances would say this could be a particularly important time to review your positions. We can move to the next slide, please. This slide and the next one are just designed to give you a quick overall view of the market. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but just to provide a frame of reference that we certainly have been seeing a period now where electricity prices compared to what we were seeing a few years ago have been quite moderate, and as you can see with the map on the left, that's been true really in most regions of the country. And when we look at the forward curves, there are some special issues in Texas. There are definitely some very significant Texas ERCOT-specific risk factors. But even in Texas, the rise in the curve is not as steep as it's been sometimes in the past, and in most other parts of the country, right now at least, the forward curve for electricity is rising only at a fairly moderate rate, and that's one of the major open questions that we will address during the course of this webinar is that going to continue, or could we see the curve potentially start sloping upward much more steeply? If we can move to the next slide. The driver for all this, of course, more than anything else, is what's been happening with natural gas, and what's really happening is that, as I think all of you know, the natural gas and electricity markets have been pretty closely linked for quite a while now, because natural gas-fired generation, even 3-4 years ago, was setting the market clearing price in most markets around the country an increasing number of hours of years. But what's happened in the post-shale market is that because of the huge supplies that are available, we've been seeing an even tighter linkage than existed in the past between the natural gas and electricity markets, and that's because of the role of competition between natural gas and coal-fired generation in absorbing the excess gas that's available and setting the market clearing price for both natural gas and electricity. Those have led to a pretty tight linkage. And with natural gas prices, we've continued to see, because of the abundant supply, we've continued to see prices that are very, very substantially below historical norms. They're not currently the cash price and the futures price for natural gas are not at the extreme lows than they were last spring. And that's, as I'm sure you all recall, last winter we had one of the mildest winters ever, and that caused particularly extreme market glut for natural gas, which drove down prices for both natural gas and electricity. Conditions this year have not been nearly as extreme, and we've had a milder than normal winter, but it's not nearly as far from the historical norms. And if you look at the grayish line that's sort of in the middle there, it's showing where prices are for natural gas are now. And as you can see, while they're significantly above the low points last year, they're actually lower than they were at the end of 2012, and certainly way below what we were seeing 2 years ago. If you focus on the bar chart on the right, we've certainly seen some upward movement in both natural gas and electricity just over the last couple weeks or so. That's been caused really primarily because we really after a very mild start to the winter, we have had very cold weather in late February, and March is starting with continued very cold weather, and that cold weather is expected to continue for much of the month at this point. And so that's caused some upward movement in natural gas prices, but as we've seen, there seems to be pretty strong resistance for the front month contract once we get just barely above 350. And as we'll discuss, we think there's a pretty high likelihood that prices have already, in the last couple of days, started to settle down a little bit, and we think that there's a pretty good likelihood that they're going to head lower for reasons we'll discuss. If we could move to the next slide. I'm just going to really very, very quickly go through the next few slides because a number of you have seen some of these before, and I just want to put the overall market conditions in context. Essentially what I want to stress is that we continue to be in a market which operates in a fundamentally different way than the natural gas and electricity markets operated during the last decade. In the last decade, as shown on the graph on the left, we had an enormous increase in the number of natural gas-fired generating units in the United States. That led to some major increases in U.S. dependence on natural gas. We got caught in a situation where at that time in the pre-shale market, it proved literally pretty much impossible to increase natural gas supplies as rapidly as was needed to meet rising power sector demand. And if we can move to the next slide, please. That led to a circumstance where really the only way for the market to balance, because we had these major increases in power sector demand for natural gas and flat or even sometimes declining supplies, was for power companies in particular and local distribution companies responsible for making sure no one freezes in the winter to bid up prices of natural gas as to whatever levels was necessary, as high a price level as was necessary to drive the most price-sensitive users out of the natural gas market. And that turned out at sometimes, in 2008, that meant prices for several months being over $9 on an extended basis. And the whole dynamic that was driving that is that all through the last decade, prices for natural gas were being driven by the need for demand destruction, the need to bid up prices high enough to drive price-sensitive users out of the market in order to balance market needs with available supplies. There also, though, there was a second factor that made a larger contribution that's often recognized to raising prices in the last decade, and that was that we just, especially in the first half of the decade, we did not have enough underground storage in order to supply potential winter needs in cold winters. We saw that vividly in the winter of 2002-2003 when we virtually ran out of natural gas in storage, and that experience really left a searing memory on the part of really all market participants because it indicated that the deficiency of natural gas in the second half of the winter of 2002-2003 really underscored that because we didn't have enough natural gas and because the storage capacity wasn't large enough, because we didn't really have a true natural gas reserve, that we were vulnerable to very severe price spikes. And the market learned that lesson and started building in a pretty large risk premium into the price of the winter month natural gas contracts, and that, of course, rippled through the whole 12-month curve for natural gas, and it drove natural gas prices up even higher than had been they would have in order just to balance supply and demand. So it's that combination of factors, the need for demand destruction and the risk premium that got built into the market, that led to prices going up in such an extreme way. If we can go to the next slide, please. As I think all of you are aware now, that set of conditions has fundamentally changed. And it's changed, and therefore, I think as long as that we fundamentally, the exposure to severe price spikes in both the electricity and natural gas markets is changed considerably. That basically, there in the natural gas market, that the only circumstance in which we're likely to see extreme price spikes is when there are transportation constraints, as we saw in New England over the course of this winter. But in terms of on a national basis, there's simply no reason for prices to spike in the way they have in the past. And that means that with in most of the time in most regions of the country, that electricity prices are not going to spike in as extreme a way as possible. The exception to that, of course, is that when we run into scarcity conditions in regions like ERCOT, where we really don't have enough generating capacity to prevent potentially severe price spikes on extremely hot days or days in which there is a lot of generation offline. But with those exceptions, I think that the exposure to severe price spikes isn't nearly as severe as it was in the past, and that's really for two reasons. One, the explosive growth in the availability of shale, and second, as is shown on the left, availability of natural gas from shale, and the second, which is shown in the right, is the really major increases that have occurred in underground storage. And what that means with the growth in shale, what I think really important to underscore here is scale. Because we just talked a moment ago about how the increase in power sector demand for natural gas during the last decade resulted in natural gas prices going through the roof. What's really important in terms of scale to recognize is that during the last decade, the entire increase in power sector demand for natural gas that drove that market dynamic over the course of a decade was a gradual increase in power sector demand that cumulatively, over a gradual year-by-year increase in power sector demand, that cumulatively over the course of a decade resulted in demand for natural gas going up by 5.4 BCF a day. And what the graph on the left shows is that we now are essentially, we had 2 years in a row in which in 12 months the supplies of natural gas went up by more than 5 BCF a day. We've even in this past year, during a year of low prices, in Marcellus Shale seen an increase of more than 3 BCF a day. So we don't think the exposure to, and similarly because we have increased storage capacity, the market has more time to adjust than it has in the past in circumstances in which the market starts to tighten. So we don't think the exposure to the really extreme price spikes is nearly as severe as it has in the past. And that's good news in a sense, but it doesn't necessarily make the jobs of any of the energy buyers in the room a simple one. It's good news in that we think the risk of really severe events is really, it's focused on the risk of scarcity conditions developing in the market, in the electricity market. And at least very near term, that's a big problem in ERCOT, but less of a problem in other parts of the country. But it's only limited good news in the sense that it remains to be seen where natural gas prices are going to settle out over time and how that's going to affect the electricity market. And when you look at where we are now, really the main thrust of this presentation today is that we still think that while we don't think we're exposed to kind of really extreme price spikes prices for natural gas going up $2, $3, $4, $5 a million BTU suddenly, we do think that there is a very significant possibility of some fairly major shifts in the forward curve that are substantial enough so that they could involve potential 20, 30, 35% increases in your cost for electricity and natural gas, and that therefore it's over a period of 3 or 4 years, and it's therefore very important to kind of look at where the curves are going to go and what that means in terms of timing of purchasing decisions, even in this environment where the risk of sudden severe price spikes, at least much of the time in many regions, isn't quite the same as what it was in the past. Now, if we can move to the next slide, with having given that general background. What's happened in the current market, essentially is because of the abundance of natural gas, as the whole natural gas market has changed. And it is now, and we think for quite a long time now, is that prices are for both natural gas and electricity are being driven by competition between natural gas and coal. And basically, what the bubble chart on the left is showing is essentially what's setting prices now is really a question of how much excess gas exists in the market and how far prices have to drop in order to absorb that natural gas. If we can move to the next slide. The good news about that is that we actually think that with the right analytical tools, given the way prices are being set now, one can predict where natural gas and electricity prices are going to head with more confidence than has been true in the past. But it remains the case that where prices settle out at any particular point in time is going to be very dependent, maybe even more dependent in the past than it has been in the past, on weather and on swings in production. And so we think what that means, and it's also going to be affected by industrial demand, it's going to be affected by hydro availability, it's going to be affected by nuclear generation, it's going to be affected by coal prices. These are all relevant factors, but what we think it does, because coal displacement is so central, that one can gain a whole lot more transparency, a whole lot more visibility into where the market might head, depending to really largely on weather and production. We've always felt, and I'll emphasize again right now, that one can never with any that essentially it's a mistake to think in terms of a single point forecast for either electricity or natural gas. That when you look at the swings in weather we've seen, when you look at the continued uncertainties regarding production, it's clear that a number of different scenarios are possible, and we think what's always critical is in evaluating what to do in the market is really to look carefully at a range of different scenarios. And that's highlighted in part by the graph on the right. And what that is showing you is just how big the impact of swings in weather have been on, and particularly if you focus on swings in winter weather, how significantly that has impacted demand for natural gas. And what you can see is that when you compare the coldest and warmest recent winters, the difference in demand for natural gas has actually been 1.5 TCF. That is an enormous number, even spread out over a year. It's an average of 4 BCF a day, but it has even greater implications for coal displacement and therefore the market equilibrium price, the price required to balance supply and demand. Because if you had 1.5 TCF less demand in a winter than you had just the winter before, for example, essentially all the things going to be being equal, you're going to have an additional 1.5 TCF of natural gas that has to be absorbed through substitution of natural gas-fired generation for coal. And as the bubble chart shows, that's going to cost much lower prices for natural gas, and that's all going to ripple through immediately to the electricity market. We can move to the next slide. Now, in terms of understanding where the market is going to head next, on the one hand, as I just emphasized, we do think it's essential to do scenario analysis, and we're going to show the implications of that in a second. But we also think that essentially, when you look at what potentially drives prices, the single most important uncertainty is winter weather. That's where you get the biggest swings in demand. And where we are now is that most of the winter is over. And we have at least some reasonable clarity. The range of potential weather conditions during the remainder of the winter, during the last few weeks of March, is bounded to some degree. And so we think we're in a position now where, because the single greatest unknown at the start of the 12-month cycle that starts in early November every year when the withdrawal season starts and ends at the end of October when the injection season ends. When you look at the market in terms of that 12-month cycle, what you see is that basically we're at a point now where the single biggest uncertainty has been resolved, and that gives us a lot more clarity into where the market is going to head. If we go to the next slide. Now, given that we now have a lot more clarity as to where the winter conditions, we think we have some very substantial visibility into where prices are going to, for natural gas, are going to head during the remainder of the 12-month cycle, the period between now and the end of of October of this year. And there's a range of possible outcomes that are shown on the graph on the left. But if you focus first on the black line that's on the graph to the left, looking at using the kind of analytical tools that are necessary in a market that's driven by coal displacement, what that's basically show you is we think we have a fair amount of confidence that essentially, if in our base case, in a base case in which natural gas production matches EIA's projections, and in which we have normal weather between now and the end of October, we think we have pretty good visibility, and we think basically that under that scenario, natural gas prices should be in the range of under that scenario, essentially that the average cash price for natural gas that'll be necessary to balance the market between now and the end of October is in the range of $3.15. That's pretty significant. If you look at the graph on the right, that's showing you where the futures for the period from April through October were as of just a few days ago. Currently, as yesterday, the average for those 7 contracts, I think, was right about exactly $3.60. And so if what that suggests to us is that the forward strip for the remainder of the injection season is very significantly overpriced compared to a scenario in which weather conditions match the historical norms and supply matches the EIA projections. Specifically that under that scenario, the forward curve might be overpriced by as much as 45 cents. Now, we don't think we're necessarily going to have a normal summer, and so the way we look at it in terms of our most normal case, if you focus on the black line again, and you look at the scale at the bottom, we think that we're likely to have a hotter than normal summer. And if that's the case, then you have to trace the black line to the right to see what the impact of that is. And the bottom line is that particularly if we have a hot summer and if EIA supply forecasts are correct, we think we could still see prices, an average, that the market could still balance out between now and October at a cash price of around $3.35. But even under that scenario, it still would be significantly overpriced. And frankly, if production is relatively close to EIA's estimates, we see it as pretty unlikely that the market equilibrium price could be a whole lot higher than that. And so that causes us to say that at least under current supply forecasts, the forward strip is pretty significantly overpriced. Now, that still leaves open the question of what happens with production. And in theory, if production tails off more rapidly than the EIA forecast, then you'd have to look at the bottom curve there, and prices. You'd have to look at the top curve there. I misspoke. Less supply would mean that the market will balance out at higher prices, but we think that between now and the end of the injection season, for a lot of reasons, that if anything, supplies will overshoot, and that would mean that prices would follow the bottom, would be closer to the bottom line there, and would be the market equilibrium price, even in a hot summer, could still be closer to $3. So, if we do a kind of complex scenario analysis, but if you look at those factors, they really strongly suggest that the near-term natural gas forward strip is too high, and that strip is pretty much priced into electricity futures as well. So we think that relative to where the market is likely to evolve between now and the injection season, that prices are likely to drop some. We think actually, though, that those price drops are likely to happen relatively quickly, really potentially within the next 30 to 60 days. And that's really for two reasons. That's partly because the forecast suggests that weather demand in April and May is going to be below normal, and that will be bullish, and that will be bearish, and that will tend to bring prices down. And secondly, the opportunities for coal displacement are by far the highest in the spring. Looking at the way prices evolve, we think a lot of owners of coal-fired generation will choose to keep their units turned off. And so we think what's actually going to happen is that we're going to see prices come down fairly rapidly between now and, let's say, late April, and that could turn out to be the bottom for the year for the curve. If we can move to the next slide. That in turn becomes really quite important in terms of looking at when to potentially cover a portion of your 2014, 15, and 16 requirements. Because what you see is that while there's not a one-to-one correlation, that there's no question that particularly during this time of the year, particularly during the first half to two-thirds of the year, that essentially the forward strips do tend to move in a way that directionally parallels what happens. Let me rephrase that slightly to be more precise. That what we see is that when we look at the next year, for example, forward strip, we see pretty consistently that while it's not a one-to-one correlation, that both the natural gas and electricity curves directionally tend to move in the same direction as near-term prices. And so the overall thesis that we feel pretty strongly about is that when you look at the market fundamentals, there is a lot of reason to think that what's going to happen is that because of coal displacement, that natural gas prices, the cash price is going to drop pretty significantly over the next, let's say, 6, 8, 10 weeks, and that it could reach a low point of the year, that will affect the electricity curve, and that it also will have direct effects for both electricity and natural gas on the forward curves for 2014, 2015, and 2016. And it's those factors that have led to the conclusion that we think that the buying opportunity to cover requirements, not just for the remainder of this year to the extent that you have them, but even looking out at 2014, 15, and 16, that the best buying opportunity of the year could come relatively soon, just looking at the market fundamentals. And that seems to be true even if you assume the EIA most likely supply case, and if it turns out that production continues to rise more rapidly than forecast, it could be even more true, because that could intensify the downward pressure on natural gas prices and therefore on the electricity curve during the remainder, during the spring season this year. So that conclusion is one, there's always the possibility that supply will fall off more rapidly, and if that happens, it could be a different situation. But in the scenarios that we think are the most important in terms of minimizing your risks, we think that we feel pretty strongly that some of the best buying opportunities of the year, just looking at the market fundamentals, are going to come soon. Now, if we can turn to the next slide. And this is just kind of illustrating essentially where we see the pricing of the 2014 strip as being now compared to where it may head. We think that even in a normal weather scenario with EIA's current price forecasts, that the 2014 natural gas curve, if anything, may already be underpriced. And we think if we're right that it's going to get pulled downward over the next 30 to 60 days, then even on the black line, even in our most likely scenario, that will mean that it's well priced. And we think that it's particularly attractive priced and particularly good time to think about covering positions for 2014. And really, if we had the 2015 curve up here, it would show you the same sort of thing. And we also think that in terms of risks that we would advise energy buyers to protect against, when you start looking further out in time, the chances that production will start to tail off more rapidly increase. And that potentially could drive the Cal 2014 onward prices up even higher. And so those add further to our feeling that now might be a particularly good time to cover at least a portion of the requirements for those years. Now, if we can move to the next slide. Everything I've covered so far is really just looking at market fundamentals. And as I mentioned at the outside, there's a really, really major second layer that we think is important to take into account in purchasing decisions. And directionally, we think it cuts in exactly the same direction, that it really provides some pretty compelling reasons to think that the time to cover positions, even 2-3 years out, is maybe soon, at least for some significant portion of your requirements. And there are special factors at work at ERCOT, and we're not going to try to cover those in any depth today because they're really a topic deserving its in-depth treatment that really can be a whole separate analysis onto its own. I think those of you who are in Texas, though, are extremely aware that there's been tremendous uncertainty created by the resource adequacy debate within Texas that already it's led to a market where capacity is very tight. There's a real possibility of extreme drought conditions again this summer and in future summers. There is a real possibility of extreme hot summers again, and there are real issues regarding adequacy of transmission, and those are really major factors, and they create really major risks in ERCOT, and they really, for ERCOT, really underscore the broad conclusions that now's the time to protect yourself. But there are also some really fundamental changes occurring nationally. And these, we've talked about, we've gone through a period of 4 or 5 years now where what's dominated all our thinking has been the shale revolution and the impact of the shale revolution on prices for electricity and natural gas. And that's going to be continuing. We are as I discussed early in the presentation, we're in a whole different paradigm right now. And in broad terms, we're going to continue to have much better availability of natural gas than we've had in the past. But that doesn't mean that prices are going to stay at current levels. And instead, I think we are seeing the possibility at this point that essentially we're at another major transition point, where on the one hand, supplies are, compared to the last decade, are certainly more plentiful. But on the other hand, where there's some really fundamental game-changing kind of changes that start occurring on the demand side that could kick in pretty soon and could affect the forward curves for electricity and natural gas, may already be having some limited effect, but could start having a significant effect later this year and could start pushing the forward curves up significantly. And they're really, I've listed at the bottom half of those slides what the major factors are, and let me dive into, if we can switch to the next slide, to dive into some of the specifics. What we're talking about with all the factors that I just listed that could fundamentally change the market on a national basis, we really are now, we're talking about what could happen in Washington, basically. And essentially, I think a big part of what has created this possibility that we could start seeing some major changes on the demand side is really the timing of the presidential election. That essentially, from a Washington perspective, We're just at the end now of a period of really at least a year, arguably a year and a half, arguably almost 2 years, where there were a lot of major issues pending, but they were essentially put on hold pending the result of the presidential election. And the election is over, and we're seeing that President Obama, now that he's been reelected, seems to be more determined, maybe even more aggressive in pursuing some of his agenda. There's no question that there's some issues on the plate now that could have really major impacts on demand. And we also have a new set of decision makers. We have a new Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz, and a new Administrator of EPA, or at least they've both been nominated and almost certainly be confirmed. And the new Administrator of EPA is Gina McCarthy, who had been head of the AIR program. And their personalities are going to make a difference. Moniz in particular is I won't try to give a full speech about the prospects of Moniz as secretary, but I think it is helpful that he comes to his job with more in-depth knowledge of the energy markets than most of his predecessors. And I think it's also important to recognize he is an academic. He was Undersecretary of Energy in the Clinton administration, but most of his experience has been at MIT as a professor and directing a lot of the high-profile studies that MIT has done of the natural gas, coal, and nuclear markets. And as an academic, he's likely to analyze problems in a fairly rigorous sort of way. If we could switch to the next slide. There's no question that the first really difficult issue that is going to be on his platter is that there's a huge battle that's developing in Washington over whether to allow LNG exports, and if so, how much liquefied natural gas to allow to be exported. This is a huge blockbuster issue. The bottom line is that I think the natural gas industry, really all of us, have been focused on hydraulic fracturing as the significant issue and tax issues as being the most significant issues in Washington affecting the natural gas portion of the industry. But I think essentially in terms of really the whole industry and certainly from the standpoint of energy buyers, that the debate over whether to allow LNG exports is really one of the most, maybe the most significant issue that could have major effects on future energy demand in the U.S. And the effects actually could start fairly soon. To export LNG, you have to get a permit from DOE, and the first permit actually was just issued in January for the Sabine Pass project that's owned by Cheniere. And what's characteristic of LNG is that the projects are very large scale. And so this particular project, it's now has a license to export LNG all over the world, and the LNG is actually going all over the world. For that particular project, it includes Korea, Spain, and India are all buying natural gas from that project. And the scale size is huge. This first permit is to export 2.2 BCF a day of natural gas, and half of that actually could start as early as the end of 2015. The project is already under construction, and there are no other sources of demand for natural gas where you can have a single project that can create an increase in demand of that size. Even a very large power plant is closer to 1/10 or 1/20 of that size. So these are huge sources, and there's potentially a huge market. There's been a lot of talk, newspaper stories that say that the market for LNG produced in the U.S. is relatively small. They're just wrong. They're out of date. I think you're seeing the assessments change rapidly, and really, for a lot of reasons, it's turned out that the projects in Australia are much more expensive than the projects here. A lot of the other potential sources of gas, things like LNG projects in Nigeria, have huge political risks associated with them. When you get to the bottom line, the U.S. and Canada, because there are Canadian projects, are in a position to get very large market share. The potential benefits to certainly the natural gas industry, but really to the country, are tremendous. The industry could become very large. It could be a major source of revenues and job creation. It could help stimulate the U.S. economy, and really has huge geopolitical ramifications, and potentially, if there's more LNG supply, it may facilitate reductions in greenhouse gases elsewhere in the world. So there are huge potential benefits from considering LNG exports. It could be a huge factor, but there are also huge questions, and that's a question really of if we start exporting very large amounts of LNG, could that have major effects on U.S. energy costs? And also, what does it mean for the manufacturing sector? The manufacturing sector it's seen tremendous growth recently as a result of the availability of low-cost natural gas. Will that get stifled if there are high levels of exports and natural gas and electricity prices start to go way up? And if we go to the next slide, the uncertainty regarding those questions has led to some fierce opposition to LNG exports. And it's an interesting combination. It includes the American Public Gas Association. It's being led by Dow Chemical and a number of other really large manufacturers in energy-intensive industries. It also includes very strong environmental opposition from Sierra Club. I would urge you to go to the website, the link for which is at the bottom of this page, not because I agree with the position of this organization personally. Well, it doesn't much matter. I actually don't. But I think it's important to get a flavor of the nature of the debate. If we can go to the next slide. There are really essentially 5 issues. To get an export license, you have to get action by DOE. DOE uses a public interest standard. And there are really 5 disputed issues. One's just how large is the market? If it's small, it's not going to have much price impact. If it's much larger, then the potential price impacts on U.S. energy costs are clearly much greater and may have to limit the amount of exports. When we're talking about evaluating what happens with LNG exports, what the potential impact is, what's the baseline? Should we use estimates of future U.S. demand for natural gas that were developed 2 or 3 years ago that showed very little growth? Or when we look at potential for industrial growth and increased power sector use in natural gas vehicles, do we need to do a different analysis where we look at the potential impact of energy costs if we have both 10 or 15 BCF a day growth in domestic use, and then potentially 5 or 10 or 15, 20 BCF a day of LNG exports on top of it? There's a big debate over that. There's a debate over how to evaluate the economics, and there's a debate over the extent to which to take into account geopolitical factors and environmental impacts. If we can go to the next slide. DOE has tried to do some studies of this. I have materials I can send you on the DOE studies if you're interested. The bottom line is that the DOE studies were very poorly done. They're trying to evaluate the potential impact of LNG exports on U.S. energy costs and the potential a net impact on gross domestic product, and the bottom line is that they are very poor studies. They've been attacked fiercely, and I think DOE is going to have trouble giving them much weight. If we can go to the next slide. And more recently, there have been studies that have been done both by Dow Chemical, which is strongly opposed to exports, and American Petroleum Institute, which you can imagine favors exports, and they show very different results. So there's a lot at stake here, and there is a real uncertainty at this point regarding whether DOE will issue export permits, if so, how quickly and how many. But the bottom line that's the important takeaway for here is that there is the potential for very large exports to occur, and some of the studies that indicate that it could result in major increases in U.S. costs for electricity and natural gas. For what it's worth, I personally think that we have a lot of ability to expand supplies, and I personally think that even if we had some fairly substantial exports, that there would only be a moderate impact on prices and that there would be very major benefits that would result from that. But I don't think the issue has been very well ventilated yet before DOE. I've actually been really pretty surprised. I think that the applicants for LNG permits and natural gas producers can and should have made a lot stronger case that really all the studies that have been done really don't take into account technology and the way that's expanding supplies and reducing cost. But I think where we're at now is that when you look at all the potential sources of demand, the CRA study that's shown on the right says that if we could have industrial demand that's substantially above even EIA's AEO 2013 estimates, makes a pretty good case that power sector demand through coal retirements could add more than 10 BCF a day of additional demand, and argues that we can get 3 BCF a day of additional demand from natural gas vehicles. If you look at where we are now, there are realistic scenarios where soon we could start seeing really major increases in domestic demand for natural gas, potentially over a period of years, more than 15 BCF a day. That's not yet in current estimates. And there's the potential that we could have LNG exports that, if they're allowed, could be just as large. So we're potentially talking about as much as a 30 BCF a day or 50% increase in the market. So, my own view is that we can, in fact, absorb a lot of that, but I think also that there's the potential that we could have these two different sources of increased demand does raise an issue that has to be examined carefully, and that really the time has come where we really need to step back and say natural gas supplies are much more abundant than we thought, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're unlimited, and that we really need to start developing a national policy about what the priority uses ought to be and just how much exports we can allow in particular. And we'll see. But the bottom line for today's purposes is that there's clearly a huge risk factor, and that DOE for now is moving forward, and that could significantly affect the price curve, potentially even very soon. Cheniere has been doing site work at Sabine Pass, but if they actually close their financing, which they could expect to do soon, and they start full-scale construction, then just from that project alone, I think the market might start to take a lot more seriously the notion that we could have more than a 2 BCF a day increase in demand. And that's, if we can skip a couple slides, please. One more. That's on top of all the EPA programs that I think you're all familiar with, that are intended to restrict emissions for coal-fired plants. And if we can go one more slide. Those can start to have results in a large number of coal-fired plant retirements at the same time that we're considering LNG imports. And if we can go one more slide after that. those in turn can result in some pretty major increases in natural gas. And so, there too, EPA is going to be taking actions during the course of 2013, and I think every time a shoe drops, the market is likely to give more and more weight